I've had the pleasure of working with our last speaker in several different incarnations. He hired me in 1995 to work at University of Washington, and then Community Hospital of Monterey. He was my application consultant when we were implementing Advanced there. And then worked with him for several years at Columbia. And I think one of the most amazing things about this kind of odd line of work that we find ourselves in, it's not something that anyone grew up reading storybooks and thinking, oh, I don't want to be a fireman, I want to be an advancement services professional. But one of the things I love about this work is just the confluence of mission and skill that we find and the people that we're lucky enough to work with. And there's really no one that I count myself luckier to have worked with than Kai. I think if you've been on the listserv, then you quickly realize what his technical expertise is like. I think if you've had the chance to talk with him, you realize how well he knows this business and this profession from all angles. And I think you can't work with someone for a long time without going through some great times and also some really difficult times. And the thing that has been most remarkable to me is during some really rough stuff that you sometimes have to handle, I look at it sometimes and I think, boy, there's just no one who could have handled that any more generously or graciously than Kai did. So he's kind of who I've always wanted to be when I grow up. So as always, looking forward to what you have to say, and thanks so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Carl. And that definitely is a mutual feeling. Thank you. Okay. First of all, can you all give me like a little show of hands? How many of you are from outside the Puget Sound area? Wow. Okay, so that's like 2/3 or if not more of this group. This weather that we've got right now, it looked a little questionable this morning. Right now it's stunning outside. It's never like this, believe me, so don't start making any plans to move here. This is truly the exception. Now, if you again want to give a show of hands of who would like to just go ahead and spend the rest of the afternoon out there enjoying the sunshine, happy to just let you go at this point, we'll just call it done.
Sorry.
Okay? No. All right, I think there was one lady, you leave. Okay. Well, okay, so we'll go ahead and do this, but please, I'll do it on the proviso that you'll actually engage with me in this process, okay? Like any time you do a presentation, you're working on putting your slides together and figuring out what you want to say. And I think there's no way on earth I've got 60 minutes worth of material here. We're going to be done in 20 minutes, we're going to be out the door, and I tail between my legs and I'm going to slink away thinking, gee, that was disappointing. So please engage with me and ask questions. Feel free to say you're full of whatever it might be. And we'll make this a little bit more entertaining. First thing I want to mention here is, well, that's not where we're supposed to go, but, oh yes it is. Okay, this is where we're supposed to go. This presentation I did with Prezi yesterday morning. Walt Dreyfus also did a presentation using Prezi. This is the first time I've used it for a presentation, so I just want to tell you ahead of time, in case you are prone to seasickness, when my slides move, they may be a little jarring for you. Anytime you use some software for the first time, you may go a little overboard. So I'm going to apologize up front that if it makes you feel woozy, I'll apologize for that. That's not where we were supposed to go. Okay, you see what I'm saying here? I'm not even sure I'm running it right. Okay. That's where we were supposed to go. Okay, what I want to talk about today is where we've been and where we're going. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I've been myself and where this business has been, and then where I see it going in future. I'm going to show you some samples of some things, some ideas in reporting, especially in visual reporting, and I'm going to pick up on some of the topics that we talked about over the last day and a half now, issues of privacy and things that are of concern to us all. Again, I'm from Columbia University. If you want to chat with me any further, let me know, or just give me your card and we can pick up. Okay, I mentioned this early when I gave a little introduction about how long I've been in this business. We had a machine called an addressograph when I started in our office. Did any of you here ever work with one? Oh, okay, Walt. the other one who, challenging me for longest number of years. This is actually a more modern version. I couldn't find one old enough when I was poking around on Google trying to get it. But basically what it was is you'd have an embossing machine that would create something that looks sort of like a credit card or a dog tag that they use in the military, only the numbers would be sort of, or the address information that you print on it would be a mirror image of what you want to produce. And then you'd lay it down on here, you put the envelope on top of it, pull this thing down, this little roller goes across like one of those old credit card things. Ours had what was called a plunger. It was that thing, remember those credit card machines had plungers on them way back? This is how we did our addressing for some of our community groups when I was at UC Riverside. In our office of about 5 people, we did all of what we called gifts and endowments, so all the gift processing, any little bit of fundraising that was done at that time in a public university. Plus we managed the university's community groups, which were several in number. So that was actually much less expensive than requesting the labels from the university mainframe computer system, which is what we used back then. So just the same, however, it was rather awkward. And by the way, let me tell you one other thing that was rather interesting about how these things worked. The cards that you used themselves had across the top a series of holes. And then you'd have a little puncher that you could use to open up that hole. And then you'd have all these cards lying together in a file. And you take a long thing that looks like a knitting needle, push it through the hole that you wanted to, for the group that you wanted to address, pull them up, and anything that fell out were the ones that you would use for your mailing. Okay, so that was a pre-sequel way of selecting your address list. I again skipped one in here. This is where I wanted to go. So in the 1970s, we then got something was called a VIDEC. You see, it took up sort of the corner of the room, had the word processing monitor and such. And what I found I could do, I mentioned this morning, I'll just say it again, is I found a way to take these address lists, put them in here as a text document where at each of the tab stops I'd have a different thing. I'd have a prefix, first name, last name, suffix, addressing information, and then a series of columns that had little X's for each of our community groups that we might want to mail to. And then I did a little word merge, and I produced labels on here, and it saved us a tremendous amount of money. And it was sort of my entree into this, because it seemed like a terribly intuitive thing to do. I couldn't understand, it was self-evident that you would do a mailing list this way. And it saved us a terrific amount of money. So let's talk a little bit about reporting. So it wasn't so very long ago our reporting looked like this, and this was pretty typical. I know at least one person in this room will recognize this immediately. Karen, where are you? Yes, okay. So Karen and I were at UC Irvine together in the late 80s and early 90s. And this was the way we did all of our reporting. Now this was actually quite modern for the time, because you'll notice it's not on green bar paper, and it was actually produced on a laser printer. So this was something a little bit later in our time, Karen and my time together at UCI. We used a line printer font, so we got the same 132 characters across the page that you would have gotten on green bar paper. Very dense in numbers and nothing but black and white. So now that's all changed, of course, and thank God. Today we have different expectations. We don't just want a lot, pages and pages of dense numbers and such, just regurgitating what's in the system. We want to have something that has graphics, color, and a little bit of style to it. In short, we want the thing to have visual appeal. And also, we want it to be we want to have graspable knowledge. So we don't want to look at that last page and try to figure out, well, what does this mean for me? We want to be able to look at a report and so immediately understand the message that's trying to come across. Questions or comments about? Okay. So let's look at some of the possibilities, and I say let's dream with me a little, because I'm going to show you some examples of reports, not that I've done necessarily. I will show you a couple that I've done. But there are some examples of reports from other organizations, and I'm going to try to talk with you about how we might take the basic ideas of those and use them in our advancement environment. Okay, so first I want to say, actually, you know what? This is kind of doing some crazy stuff here because I wanted to zoom in on this little guy. Okay. I hope some of you will consider this a challenge. And now what I mean by that is hopefully this group will reconvene in about a year's time. And hopefully some of you will decide to be presenters next time around. And hopefully you'll come back with some examples of some data visualization, some graphical reports that you're doing that may fall in line with what I've got to show. They may be entirely different, of course, but just to be a conversation starter. Okay. So I wanted to say, don't be afraid of color. We've all got color printers nowadays. They're not cheap. It's a little bit more expensive than doing it in black and white. But it certainly does add a lot to our ability to look at a report. Now, and I apologize for the scanned image here. One thing I would say is, this violates one of my rules about reporting. Numbers should always be right aligned. Okay, but other than that, I like the fact, it's like numbers in a column, right alignment, okay? Just remember that. I like the use of color. It pulls some things together while differentiating other things. This would be great probably for a place where you do need to have some dense numbers, but it also still can make it a little bit enjoyable to look at. Okay, now here's an example. Instead of going with a pie chart, this might be a way of presenting data and showing it in the various size of something, right? And I also like here how they group some things together by color. And so the performing arts, for example, this is an organization let's see, where is this again? In Philadelphia, of a group of cultural organizations in the area. And they're grouped by their basic type. And so the performing arts are all the purples, and then you've got a different type of group in blues, and then green again. What I also like here, in addition to the little squares that they've used, is they've almost got like an entirely second chart right here in this column. You'll see that, and interestingly, they've arranged it such that the size of this, relative to the others, makes sense. Even though I don't know how they could have guaranteed it based on the number of squares in there. But they arrange it in such a way that you're actually seeing two different things at one time. And I think it's just a beautifully creative way of having done that. Anyone doing anything like this at present? I mean, clearly this is not probably your every weekly report that's going out, but it might be a report to your Board of Trustees or Regents. I also think here perhaps you might have along here, these would be your schools and colleges or the units within your organization. The size of the gift might be sort of annual level, you know, under 10,000, 10 to 100, 100 to a million, million and up, something along those lines. Just a nice way of looking at it. It's a little bit different. Okay, also, here's an idea about being creative. Why not use no? There we go. I'm not sure why it's misbehaving a little bit. It's not following the plan quite right. So here we're showing the progress bars, but we're not just showing a bar. We're actually using something that is representing the thing that we are measuring. So here we're looking at attendance, perhaps, members and subscribers. So we've got actual people that we're showing. Now, that way that might be used in our line of work, you may have a chart that uses coins or stacks of dollars, you know, for relative dollar amounts that are raised. I also find interesting here, if you look real closely, some of them actually, here this one in particular, kind of reflects the nature of the thing itself. So here we have what looks like a dancer doing something that most of us here probably cannot do. But I think that just adds a little bit of extra whimsy to the report. Are any of you using things like this? Come on, now you all promise to engage with me here.
Nope. Bars.
Bars.
Bars and school colors.
Okay, yeah, okay. Lots of purple and gold or what have you. Okay. Yeah, here again, this might be the units that are participating. It might be alumni participation by school. It could be event attendance by the school of affiliation of the alum. Anyone else have any ideas of similar kind of charts and how that might look? too late in the day, isn't it?
No, I mean, yeah, it's just...
Okay, be a little unconventional as well. Here's an example where we've got a chart that it almost looks kind of like a stadium, kind of blown out here a little bit. And tip the scales a bit, I said. So we've got what narrow bands over here and much broader ones. Does anyone see an issue with that immediately?
Scale.
Scale. Relative importance is a good observation. If we really want to emphasize these of course look so much bigger just based on how they're placed here. They're not necessarily, or they are in fact not, as large as they look in comparison to the others. This one here is artificially minimized, right, just because of the way it's designed. Is that a legitimate thing to do?
Well, it is other.
Yeah, okay, so we want to, yeah, who cares about other, right? Does anyone take issue with that? Deceptive.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah?
We can
okay.
make the data tell you whatever we want.
Well, what I want to talk to you about, yes?
On the contrary, I mean, it's a charts like that are a form of communication. There's no, I mean, if you're trying to get something across, what is, I mean, as long as you're not, lying.
Well, and I don't think, yeah. Okay, let's go back and look at it because I don't. We're not lying, right? We still have the dollar amounts or whatever these counts that are along this axis. Of course, the bands get larger, so we are emphasizing a story here without lying about it, but we're not being 100% honest. I would argue. I could actually see using this the other way around, perhaps, in giving those who've had a little short shrift and maybe giving them an opportunity to look a little bigger in comparison to those who have done quite well. Okay. So what I want to show you next here, if we zoom in again, sorry about the. Has anyone here run across this book or others like it? How to Lie with Charts, How to Lie with Statistics. Okay, I recommend anyone, if doing reporting is part of what you do, I think reading about how to lie with charts and lie with statistics is incredibly instructive because it'll help you to avoid creating a chart that is unintentionally misleading. And it will help you identify when you're looking at charts or graphs presented by others when there's someone who's not being entirely honest with data that they're providing to you. So no one's heard of this? Okay, check it out. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is something fairly new called a tree map. Has anyone seen a tree map? Okay, we've got, yeah, well, it figures, yeah. Yes, of course you would. Okay. So it's not a tree per se. Now, so here's the first one that I saw, and when I first saw it, I thought, wow, that's really cool. And here, note the source. I'll show you that again in just a moment. Now, the purpose of a tree map is to show you relative size of something. And there is software that I'll talk about in just a moment that will allow you to do this. Now, in this particular example from this website, the sum total of all these things, even though it's called the billion-poundogram, this does not actually equal to a billion, but it does help you to see relative size of different amounts of money. So, for example, up at the top here, Tesco, that's sort of an English version of shopping, of a store. You can see their revenue versus their profits and how that compares to certain other things in terms of relative size. So that's it's a neat way of looking at information. So here's this the website of this gentleman. Does anyone follow this? Okay, yeah. He's a real great person to follow. He also has an RSS feed is the way I get this. And he's got really some great data visualization that he puts out there.
He has a couple of TED Talks, too.
Pardon me?
He has a couple of TED Talks.
Oh, has he? Okay,
Yeah.
I've not seen those. Okay, that would be definitely worth. He's got some TED Talks for those who didn't hear that. So that would be worthwhile seeing as well. So now here's my effort in doing this. I'll tell you in a moment the software that I use to do this. But this chart shows Columbia campaign giving by school within division. So this is as of a couple of maybe 2 or so weeks ago. In green here, we've got the medical center. Up here, professional schools, which are grouped together just because they have no other grouping. Undergraduate education, arts and sciences graduate school, and then all the other programs down here. Now you can manipulate the colors a little bit, and so you can see the relative size of giving to each. The nice thing about the tool is that when you actually use it, you can hover your mouse over one of these areas, and you see what area it belongs to, and also the dollar amount and the percentage of total. Okay. Now, unfortunately, the particular tool I'm using, when it's output, it does not output to Flash. And so I could not actually demonstrate this for you here unless I were to open the tool and show it to you that way. But I think it's a great way of showing the information about relative size. So any of you doing this sort of thing right now?
I want to.
Yeah. Okay, now I went one step farther then and did the same thing. I didn't futz with the colors this time so much. I wanted to do it, again, school within division, but then also breaking it down to department. So here in the physicians and surgeons is the name of our medical school. So you can see that, well, if you could read this. Not that I can. Okay, so we can see the relative size of the Department of Medicine versus ophthalmology versus surgery, etc., and how much money has been raised for each of those. Okay. Still no questions?
Is it drill downable? Like when you're in the tool
Yes.
itself, can you, like if you're at the division level, can you click on the division and drill down into
That's
the
right.
division?
Yes. Yes, you can. And I haven't tested to see how many levels deep you can nest this. Now, in our case, we only have, I think, 4 levels that we use typically, or 5. So, but that would be interesting to just keep drilling down farther and farther.
How's it been received by people that are used to seeing Excel spreadsheets?
Most people, they like the wow factor. We have not yet integrated this into our actual campaign reporting that's going to our trustees, however. I think they still, well, one of the reasons that we haven't mucked with that is they've been getting consistent reports for the length of the campaign, and to help them, understand it and not kind of pull the rug out from under them, we've kept it the same thus far.
Would be good for post-campaign summary or post-campaign fundness of, well, here's the stuff that you've been seeing all throughout the campaign, but look at all the other stuff that, that we found out from this campaign, and look at, here's a fun way to look at it. Stuff like
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, ma'am?
Do you feel like you're having different conversations about the data, presenting it this way versus the old?
Well, I think here things immediately pop out at you. If you just look at the numbers, what a lot of people will look at and think, my God, medical center gets an awful lot. So they get over 1/3 of all the money we raise is determined for the medical center, and yet Columbia really thinks of itself more as an institution that stresses undergraduate education, right? And arts and sciences, graduate work and such. Yet those are relatively small over there on the right-hand side. Yes, sir.
So 2 questions. One, can you actually export the raw data to Excel? So you're representing this with a chart. Can you also export the data that's behind the chart?
Well, the way you actually do it is kind of the other way around. You write your SQL first, and then within this product you can plunk down your select statement. You do your connection to your database, and then it retrieves the data dynamically. So you could just take that same select statement and generate your output that way. So you don't go from here to get the output. You would have gotten that via the select statement. Does that make sense?
It does, but like for instance, say with the medical school, if it has $1,000 for one particular department and then $3,000 for another department, maybe what somebody also wants to see in addition to the chart is an Excel spreadsheet that shows that same information, breakdown by actually the department. So you just write the SQL once, you import it into this program, and it gives you the results. But then also, if you wanted to export it, send it to somebody as an Excel spreadsheet so that they could do whatever analysis on it they wanted. That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. Not in the particular tool I'm using. I think this is all still pretty new. and probably once more vendors are in this market developing this. I only know of a couple that are doing this. I'll show you the URL to one of them, and I'll tell you about another. But right now, it's pretty rudimentary in what you can do at this point. Okay, you can get this. You can't get a whole lot more. Yeah.
Can you retrieve more than one characteristic, like where you have department, could you also retrieve like purpose, so that you not only where does the money go, but also have it redisplay suddenly and say, well, within that, which purposes did it go to funding, a scholarship?
Yeah, and in fact, it would probably look very similar to this. So instead of drilling down here into departments, what I might have used as the next level would be the purpose, right? So you could have seen how much of this went to student aid versus faculty staff support versus program support, etc. Yeah.
I'm going to use the I word here, interdisciplinary. And maybe that's just a whole nother subject, and you can say, screw it, we'll talk about it next year. But play charades on that.
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, how does this
Take
work
me one sentence further, please.
Right. How are you integrating interdisciplinary reporting into this, where you have funds that are being split? I mean, is that a data side issue?
That's a data side issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Thank
approached
you.
that myself in our ALC program at the university, so I just wanted to
Right.
throw that out there in the big group of how are people, integrating interdisciplinary crediting and fundraising and graphing and stuff into a solution like this. Can you overlay or
Don't you do like pattern fill over?
can you plaid? Can we get a plaid?
Right here is a thing called Interschool.
Okay.
We have, it's kludgy, and I'm sure you're all doing something similar, however. You'll get some money, it's for bioengineering. So is that medical school, is it engineering? Well, in fact, they claim they're sharing it, right? Okay, all right, thank you for that. So ultimately, where we take our direction is we find out what accounts it's actually deposited into, and then we reflect it that way. So if we get a grant for bioengineering that goes 50-50 to medicine and to engineering, then we will break it out that way as well, and we consider it two things, not one. Yeah. But thank you, Advanced System, because that's a limitation of the database, not that we're trying to achieve.
Probably it will be two sub-budgets related to schools, so if you're proportion of the level of granularity of the sub-budget or budget, you can drill down to sub-budget and see how it is.
Yeah, if the dollars that you're looking at here are more budgetary than gift income, absolutely. And again, I don't know how many levels deep you could go, but you could continue drilling down however many levels it allows. Yeah. Yeah.
So my second question was really following on that. So if you have this major picture, could you kind of like, in a sense, bookmark this, and then as you drill down, you bookmark the other level, as you drill down to the third one, you bookmark that, so that then you could know what you've done, and it kind of leaves a trail. Is that feature there?
That feature is not built into this software right now. No. So you couldn't. Well, I mean, on the one hand, you can zoom down, and it knows where you're zooming down. You'll zoom down into that quadrant, and then when you zoom up, you'll zoom up one logical quadrant from where you had, where it goes up from there. But it's not like it's leaving a popcorn trail along the way. Yeah.
Is it possible to see the boxes change size over time, animated some ways?
Again, not in this particular tool. And let me move on. Okay, I've got one other, I think, here to show you. You can also do this in the circle find. And I didn't zoom in on it because I think there's already one problem here. The larger circle is defined, it appears to me, around the circumference of the smaller circles, right? So the larger circle does not necessarily represent the actual size of what it holds. It just groups together. So I find this a little bit of a difficult one to work with, and so I didn't plan to spend a lot more time talking about it. Now, this is the URL for this particular product that I'm working with. It's actually made by just a funky little German company. You can use it for 30 days to see if you like it, and then it's one of those where you to $100 and you get a license. It's not beyond what you've seen. It's not amazingly sophisticated. You can play with the colors. You can play with the texture of the colors a little bit. But really what you're getting is that percentage breakdown in that graphical boxy kind of shape.
Does it have an online publish?
No, right now the only format in which you can save it, if I remember correctly, is the vector graphic. And so, I mean, I wish you could save it in Flash, because then you'd have much more of this interactivity, but that's not the case. The other one I wanted to mention, the other vendor in the space that I came across that's worth looking at is from the University of Maryland. So just go out and try, what is it, umd.edu, and look for TreeMap, and you'll find their product. The nice thing about their product is it's free. The downside is although it has a lot more technical capability than the one that I've shown you, it also, the end product is not quite as pretty and as slick. Okay. Does anyone happen to know what product that might be at Microsoft?
Panorama, but it's something. Panorama is additional to
The other product that, if it's not doing this now, that I imagine it might soon enough, is Excelsius. Is anyone using that? Yeah. Okay.
At my last place, and they could export it to Flash or
Yeah.
into an Adobe PDF that had Flash.
Right. And it's a beautiful product, and again, check that out. Excelsius was a Crystal product. I mean, it still is a Crystal product. And well, actually, originally it was its own thing, but then Crystal acquired it, and Crystal in turn was acquired, and you know how that goes. They've changed the name of it in the most recent version. It's now called something like Dashboard Builder or something like that. But if you Google Excelsius, you'll find it. Now, I have Excelsius, and my gripe with Excelsius is just about the access of data, or accessing data, because the version that you and I would typically buy for $200, $300 or whatever it costs allows you to draw data out of an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe out of other small sources like that, out of a text file, for example. The version that allows you to dynamically query a remote database like Oracle or Sybase or SQL Server, that one runs in the thousands. And essentially it's the same software, but it's just the notion that you're accessing data dynamically out of a large database, and suddenly the price shoots up. It wasn't just like $2,000 or $3,000, it was like $6,000 or $7,000 for that version.
Can you dynamically link your Excel to the database?
Well, that was the trick. That was the next place I was going with it, and I'll admit there that I didn't actually. I wouldn't be surprised if they found some way to kind of put the kibosh on that. The same thing you could do if you can access an Access database, for example, and just link a table or link a query. That seems pretty self-evident. But then I don't think they could get away with charging $7,000 for something that where you can do it for $300. So I wouldn't be surprised if they had some way of avoiding that. Questions on that? Yes, sir.
Just a comment. We just started using a software program that's for graphics, and it's called Advisor Solutions.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah. In fact, we are one of those. Doug Cogswell, you probably run across his name, right? So he's the guy who's in charge, at least for the education part, for Advisor. We actually licensed Advisor a couple of years ago. We went through all the effort of installing the software and writing the queries that extract data out of our Oracle database and put it into a series of reporting tables which Advisor can access. And we practically make nil use of it. And that's because the very people that we thought would really latch onto it and love it and play with it have had absolutely no interest. They kind of shrug their shoulders. I still think it has a lot of value. And I think for anyone who's really a systems person and a data wonk, it's definitely something you want to check out. So the word is advisor, not an S but a Z, and I think it's basically it's a great product. Lets you sort of analyze your data and find out where the correlations are along certain dimensions. Yes, ma'am.
So in light of that, then where do you go? Because I totally love looking at graphics.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of find that sweet spot of like, I'm really loving producing this and I think it's beautiful, but the users don't care so much.
Yeah.
Where have you kind of gone in finding the balance? Just give you what they actually want as opposed to what's actually really cool.
One of the toughest things for me, and I bet this is true of a lot of you, is that there are 40 working hours in the week, right? Actually, at Columbia, it's 35, so yeah, it's pretty sweet. But there's only so much you can work into the work week, and so, for example, with Advisor, I would love to get in and roll my sleeves up and demonstrate to those other folks in the office how useful it could be. And I would love to get into more of this stuff and play with it more and demonstrate what applicability it might have here or there or elsewhere. But at some point you have to decide what you're going to carve out time for and what things you need. If they don't resonate, you say, okay, fine. So what if we spend buckets of money on that? If the users for whom it's intended, they're not going to pick up and run with it, there's only so much I can do. So, another book recommendation. Have any of you seen this gentleman's book? Now, we showed you his website a moment ago. This is actually a book that he has out in bookstores. Here, I love this quote about pie charts. Okay, it's his pet hate. He loves pie, hates pie charts. So, and the point being is that there are some really simple ways of showing data that we've all grown up with. We all have done pie charts, bar charts, etc. We've had the capability of generating them ourselves now for the last 20, 25 years with Lotus first and then with Excel. And they're getting a little long in the tooth. So the idea is, are there some other ways of visually presenting information that will resonate more with our end users? And this is a great book.
Does it have a tool that dynamically creates those things so you don't have to manually create those?
No, this is going back to the question this morning. I think if I had a lot of money, one person I'd really love to bring into our shop would be a graphic designer. I would love to, and this is not just for doing things like a report to the trustees, but just to take a look at all of our reporting and see if we can't make it more visually appealing. We might find some ways of marrying the graphic design with the more mundane tools that we have. Now, here's another thing I wanted to show you. This is one of the vendor products that's out there in this market space right now, and it's displaying relationships in a way that we're pretty familiar with, right? So any of us who have Advance or Banner and such, you have a person, and then you have, okay, the spouse is this, the employer is this, etc. And we're all kind of used to that. So here's a way that they have extended on that, is by building what they call it's either a tree or a spider. And what I really like about this is, you can see you've got this person, and then this person has these people in common, or rather knows all those folks that we have them linked to, as well as organizations. And then you can chart your several degrees, and you can get all the way to Mr. Kevin Bacon. Have any of you seen a demo of this stuff? It's really fun to watch, because as you go through, you can also sort of double click and see, well, let's see who else Amanda knows, and then it'll burst out from there, showing all of those relationships. On this particular vendor's product, you can also dynamically pull in data out of their prospect management. This is from Blackbot. You can dynamically pull it out of their prospect management database and show what sort of board relationships are in the public record. So I think that's really slick. I'm not entirely sure how these people are out here, but anyway, I think it's a rather nifty tool. The one thing that I'd like, and I've suggested this to them, the way they could extend this and make it a little bit more interesting is to be able to type in 2 donor names and then find out what people do they have in common and how many jumps does it take. Okay, so you may have you've got a fundraiser going to Chicago, and you know you've got a couple people there, but you want to find out how you can get the right people together who has mutual friends, mutual contacts, etc. Any questions on that?
The website for that?
Oh, this is not on a website, but this would be blackbaud.com. This is their part of their Blackbaud CRM product. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Have you had any experience with any experience using Oracle Apex? It's a bit partnered with charting companies that the basic charts that come with it are pretty raw. I mean, the main advantage I think is that the solution is server hosted, so like data extraction that's not a problem anymore, and that's the problem we've had is that once you get into large data sets, taking it out of the product is troublesome. It's content-limiting. But have you had any experience using?
I have not used Apex myself. It's a separate installation that you do in the Oracle database, and what Apex is basically a tool to design quick and easy web applications that are native to Oracle and access Oracle data. And it's what I've seen of it. It's really slick, and it's a quick and easy way of doing that stuff. Again, here it's one of those questions for me is I simply don't have the time to sit down and learn that and take the class, etc. So I haven't gone down that road yet. I don't know of others who are doing it in higher ed. Any of you? Apex, ring a bell? Yeah? You're using Apex?
We're moving away from using it, but it's something that has to.
Okay, and why do you choose to move away from it?
Our current customer management system allows for integration directly with SQL and reports. So with Apex, we're using PL SQL. The reports just weren't as visually flexible.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, so it's no longer the 1980s. This was something that I showed you, this relationship spider thing. That's a recent design. Clearly it is probably not something a lot of us are currently doing. This is one of my current pet peeves, are database vendors that aren't keeping up with the times. I've got a particular one. Kushal is laughing at me already. Yeah.
We're all laughing.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you have a relationship with your vendor, ask them why they're not doing some of this stuff, and find out if they can't get a little more up to date. Okay. Before we're done talking about reporting, I want to talk a little bit about ethics in reporting and reporting ethics. Now, first, does anyone have any guidelines at your institution around ethics in reporting? Okay, what I mean by that, I guess I should say, is we're all, well, we are certainly not all, but many of us here are higher educational institutions, and we comply with the guidelines from CASE and the Council for Aid to Education for what things to count in our numbers and what not to count. So that kind of gift counting rules are pretty well established. I think we all make small exceptions to them, but chances are those aren't exceptions that are way off base. But what I would like to do at Columbia is to come up with some internal, at Columbia, rules for how we query data and what kind of data we present. And I'll tell you specifically why this has come up. My office is responsible for all the gift reporting for Columbia as a whole, and we also provide reports that are unit specific. One of the units at our university, they like to do things a little differently. It's the undergraduate college, so they want to be able to credit a little bit differently. One example is donor wants to make an annual gift, and they want to give you $50,000 to cover their annual giving for the next 5 years. Okay. How many of you do anything like that? According to the rules, strictly speaking, that was a gift this year. That gets counted this year. It's a $50,000 gift. End of story. Okay. But for donor recognition purposes, we need to come up with a way of recording that as $10,000 this year, and then $10,000 of recognition credit in each of the subsequent 4 years. Not easily done. Our system doesn't allow anything like it, so we come up with some jury rigging to make it happen. And ultimately, I would just like to say, it doesn't make any sense. You know, so because I think it's lying a little bit. It's a little unethical to say that that it's this when it's really that. So I was just interested in hearing from you all, if any of you have established guidelines about how you intend to do your reporting to make sure that you're all kind of on a level playing field. No? Yes?
I think if I understand what you're asking me out, we have recognition, the way we calculate our recognition giving is standard across the board for whoever we're providing support to.
Okay, and that's as long as you're generating the data centrally.
And that's the only way.
Ah, okay, okay. We've devolved some of our reporting in some of our units to the school level. Basically, it comes down to if they can afford to hire somebody, we will work with whomever they've hired. And so we try to be accommodating as much as possible, but we also wag our fingers at times. At one point, they actually tried, I know you're all going to groan at this one, they tried to count some endowment income money in their annual numbers. Okay, now we all know that that's a big no-no, but such is some of the things that happen.
You weren't able to get the audit office or the county office to support you? And
oh, I bet we could. Yeah, I bet we could, and I have brought them in once or twice, you know, on targeted things. And I like the idea of having a good collaborative relationship with internal audit. And I think if you don't know your internal auditor at your institution, they're a really great person or people to take out to lunch and butter up, because they will be coming around knocking at your door sooner or later. So build that relationship as early as you can. I also am always a little reticent. You know, I like the idea of bringing them in if I've got a problem, but I also don't want to expose anything that might make them say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we need to add you back to our list. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about security. Okay, we spent a lot of time yesterday afternoon talking about security, and it's something, of course, that if you're not paying attention to it, then you really should. So anyone here a little bit scared around the whole notion of security and data security and such? Okay, I really think if you're not nervous about this, if it doesn't keep you awake at night at least once in a while, then really perhaps it should. So how many of you have things in your database that would cause some level of exposure, like social security numbers? Is anyone retaining those any longer?
They're encrypted.
Encrypted? Okay, hardware encrypted?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. And certainly that's better than nothing, but I think if we had asked the same question maybe 5 years ago, half the hands would have gone up, or perhaps even more. We got rid of all of ours a couple of years ago. And it's one thing that just reduces that exposure a little bit. How many here are familiar with your state guidelines for how you need to notify people in your database if there's ever been a breach, those guidelines? Now, you're also aware that not only should you be familiar with what happens in your own state, but in about 49 other states, plus the District of Columbia. Okay, because you probably all have national databases. If some of those addresses are for people who live out of state, elsewhere, those laws come into effect at that point. So it can be pretty scary. Were all of you familiar with what happened to UCLA a couple of years ago? This should have been a real big wake-up call for all of us in higher education. UCLA, well, show of hands, I can skip it if you've all heard it. Okay, you've not heard. Okay, so a couple of hands. UCLA was managing the database for one of the UC campuses, or the newest campus in the UC, which is UC Merced. They didn't yet have a fully fleshed out IS shop on their own, and so all of that stuff was going down to UCLA, being done there, and then shipped back to Merced. So these aren't actually UCLA data, but Merced data that came into question. So the database was hacked, is the short story. And there were the types of information in the database that would require notification. So social security numbers being the principal thing. I don't know if they also had credit card numbers. Any of you have credit card numbers in your system at present? Yeah, no reason to at all. So UCLA took a very aggressive, very proactive approach in this. And they knew that they had really screwed up, and they knew that this was going to besmirch their reputation. And so they decided to do, like years ago, if any of you remember Tylenol, when they had the what was it, cyanide or arsenic or something that showed up in Tylenol. They took a similar approach. They took the very high road. They set up a large phone bank. They attempted to call everybody. They did multiple mailings to those people. They were very, very public about the fact that they had screwed up and that they tried to make good. They helped anyone whose information was compromised. They helped set up the credit monitoring and doing other things like that. Is Sean still here, Sean Drew? Okay, I don't remember what Sean would know. There's a multiplication factor that you need to use. How many of something in your database is going to cause you trouble like that? So how many social numbers, multiply it by this number, and that's how much you can expect to spend. And it's a pretty high number.
It's $410 per.
Thank you. $410 per. Okay. So consider how many social numbers you've got in your database. Well, you haven't, but keep in mind that there are other things also that could put you sort of on the slippery slope. I think in some states, a full birth date is considered the type of information. If it's in combination with a name, birth date and address, this differs state by state. Then that's something that would need to be notified about as well. Are all of you still keeping full birth dates? We've actually kind of toyed with the idea of lopping off the day portion so that we have month and year, in the hopes that that might sort of lessen our exposure a little bit. We'd need to really research that before we decide to do it. It would still give us a lot of information. If we know someone was born in August of 1945, for example, we would still be able to use that for matching purposes and the like. We don't necessarily have to know it was on the 25th of August. But, so that's something that we've given some thought to. Any questions on this? Yes?
I was just going to say, for PCI compliance, one of the things is you're required to have an information breach manual, so to speak. And when I was researching it, I came across theirs is available like on the web, and so I kind of used it a little bit.
What happened to UCLA? They actually ended up getting called before the U.S. Senate, I think it was, and they had to provide testimony about what happened. And because the U.S. Senate was using this in developing some of its where they were going with laws for disclosure. And the whole transcript of that is available on their website. So if you're interested, go out to UCLA and look for breach and data breach, etc., and you'll pretty soon find it. And they have a wealth of information that you can learn from their mistakes.
Is that before or after California in 1304? Was that the cause?
California.
The law that was their disclosure law?
I think
it was right around that time.
I think this was before, and I think that's what motivated the law. And however, again, UCLA took a very high road here. They maybe weren't even legally obliged to do everything they did, but they wanted to go and take the very high road.
I think this was the case that was the model for how that law was written.
Quite likely, yeah, quite likely. Kushal?
So are institutions not using socials at all?
Oh, we're not, no.
Or no, database, the social security database, nothing at all?
Not in our alumni donor database.
No.
No. I mean, but are your institutions allowing you to access that for specific research purposes?
And that's one of the things I alluded to in the panel earlier when I asked Sean about, asked Sean to elaborate on that, was when we first did it, people got pissed at us because they couldn't, like the UW-Net ID database, use Social Security ID to link across and map across. And they couldn't do that anymore because they would call us and say, so-and-so wants to, and I want to see if they're an alumni. And they're like, I have their Social Security number. And we go, that doesn't help because we don't.
Yeah.
And so, but then we said, well, what's their address or what's their phone number? And that's what Sean was saying. We got better at identifying people by those, what the HIPAA's got 47 some different touch points that you have to protect. And so there's plenty of other stuff out there. If you get matches on, again, I wish Mike was here. He's got algorithms for how many you need to be pretty sure that you got a match.
We found that a lot of the research type things wouldn't even take it. Well, if you're doing NCOA or well screening, they just won't even take that out of it. So in other words, there's no reason to keep it, we found.
Right.
Absolutely no reason.
At Columbia, all of our alumni have what we call a unique identifier. And it's this little garbled thing with letters and numbers. And it can give you access to university resources. And so all alumni have the ability to maintain that and set their passwords. They also get email forwarding that way for life, etc. Until about a year ago, if you need to reset your password, you could go online and do so, but you have to enter your social security number, right, to authenticate yourself. And obviously that was something we had to take off and had to change. So we, in our system, developed something we call the ringer, because we say we're putting someone through the ringer in order to go through this gauntlet of questions to try to authenticate who they are. So first they put in their uni, and then it will show a number of maybe a half dozen addresses and say, which of these is one of your former addresses? And then we have, a large table full of bogus addresses or actual addresses that aren't the real one. And so we'll jumble a list of addresses, and they have to identify which is theirs. And then they're asked, which of these gifts looks most like your most recent donation? And then we show them the date and the dollar amount, etc. And the dollar amounts, fluctuate depending on what kind of giving history it is. So we put them through a series of questions like that, and then if they answer all of them correct, then we allow them to reset their password on their own. So there are ways of getting around this sort of thing, this authentication with social numbers. We thought we'd have a real problem with the death index, the Social Security death index, identifying the correct person, but ultimately, no, it's not that bad. Okay, well, we've been through this. Mother's maiden name is also an interesting thing, and think of how many of you might have databases where you have relationships, and you know that someone's mother was an alumna of your institution 30 years prior, and of course you've got her birth name in the system also, so someone could connect the dots and find that out. In some states, mother's maiden name, because it's historically been used as one of those identifiers, that's also one of the things that, if it's breached, is reportable.
So do you take the relationship out?
Well, we haven't done that, no. I certainly wouldn't want to. Luckily, New York State is not one that funds us with this, so that's not a problem for us. Okay, so one last topic I want to talk about, and that's privacy. Again, this is something we've hit on once or twice. Any of you currently, we probably skipped this because we talked about it a couple times already, any of you gleaning any data out of any of those sources that are available out there? Collecting it and taking it back? Now, as Mike mentioned earlier, Mike Fasaya, that it is technically not kosher to do so, evidently. I thought it was. At least you oughtn't, although those data, of course, are available to you. And then do you purchase data? Any of you purchase, some of the routine things we do is we go out and try to do, phone number of pens and email address of pens. But what about the other types of data that you can get nowadays? Does anyone have a story about data that you've actually gone out and purchased?
We purchased the matching gift company information.
Yeah.
And we haven't had any problems with it.
So do you purchase, or do you also get the linkage that they do, tell you who works where? Or is it just the data about the company's matching program?
Just the data about the company's matching.
Yeah, I think you're safe with that.
Well, we actually send our folks out, donor new donors out to and get a health profile to see if they match up with a matching company.
Okay.
And then we attach them.
Mm-hmm.
And then we contact them to ask them if they has considered working with companies match. Raise a lot of money that way.
And have you had any issues with that?
No,
No?
It's been very successful.
Yeah.
It's probably tripled the program.
Oh, terrific.
So, I mean, in prior experiences, in a corporate type environment, it's nothing for corporations to use Experian and a lot of other sources.
Sure.
To go out and get profile information just to send out information about sales and, people, for instance, that just bought homes, older homes, and send out things to try to see if they'd like to have new hardwood floors and stuff
Right.
like that. So, I don't know that there's an issue with trying to determine things that people in your database like, because that may give you an opportunity in fundraising to give them offers of, contributions in areas that they may be interested in. Someone who's attending art events or dance events, kind of nice to send them information about ticketing for the new season, as well as, would you like to make a gift?
Right. I certainly agree that there are probably some data out there that are inoffensive for us to collect. Finding out their employment data, for example, if they're a subscriber to the opera, to the theater, etc. But when do you cross a certain line where it starts becoming a little questionable? Karen?
Our annual giving office wants us to pursue purchasing cell phone numbers. I'm hesitant on that one for a number of reasons.
Yeah. What are your hesitations there?
Well, privacy, costs. Not so much costs anymore because a cell phone
Yeah.
plan is, but there's a new sort of ruling I'm not really familiar with, and I need to get more familiar with it on using cell phone numbers through an automated calling program.
Okay. Not aware of that. Yeah, I think at some point we cross a line from collecting data that sort of, certainly if they give it to us, that's one thing, that's free and clear. But once we start going out and collecting it from external sources, I think at some point there comes a gray zone, and then at some point maybe you're getting into an area where I know that I don't want to crawl up into their business too much. I'm afraid.
Wyoming.
It's called what?
Wyoming.
Wyoming, yeah, okay, right. Walt?
Are you doing well screening on inpatients?
No. No, we are not. We do have, we periodically get a table of grateful patients, and we do attempt a mailing to them, but we haven't well screened them in any way. I'll take that back. There's one thing we do know is whether they paid their own way at the hospital or whether they had insurance coverage, something along those lines. So we do know that little bit about them. But no, we're not putting them through well screening. Yes, sir.
I guess my confusion factor in that, in a lot of the thought process here, is that we have an entire department called Prospect Research that does this very thing. Every day, all day long, dig into people's information to establish their financial capabilities to make a gift. What's the difference between that and determining it through automated methods? I mean, I don't see the difference other than how it's being done. You're just, broadcasting versus individualizing.
Right.
But it's doing the exact same thing. So it wouldn't matter from an investigative standpoint whether you do it to one person or your entire database. It's the same either ethical or non-ethical thing. It's not a volume issue. It's a should you do it at all, and you couldn't run a program if you didn't do it for major gifts. Yeah. You'd just be shooting in the dark at who to call.
Well, your point's a very good one. We are doing a lot of this stuff. But we're doing it the hard way. And I guess maybe in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if you're going to actually do it the pedestrian way, and the way we've always done it, then that makes it somehow legitimate.
Yeah.
And if we take the shortcut route and pay money for it, and get someone to provide it to us in an electronic format, that somehow is tainted. Your point's well taken. There's a logical inconsistency in that.
Right, exactly. And that's, just previous experience, whenever you can at least narrow your population down to where you focus on the ones that matters, you're not just broadcasting really in reality.
your point's well taken.
What's the difference between fishing with the rod and fishing with the net?
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please?
Fishing with the rod and
Yeah.
fishing with the net.
Yeah.
There are some rules
Okay.
that you can fish with the rod and you cannot fish
Yeah.
with the net.
Well, and that's
With